And I'd like to just ask and caution that the media, we would respectfully ask the media and politicians and everybody else involved not do anything to incite a panic, because there's no reason to panic at all. This is something that is being handled professionally.
I will tell you, there's been a lot of irresponsible rhetoric among Democrats and commentators.
Who is this?
On the left.
Name some names, sir.
Well,
because this is just, it just feels like gaslighting. Please name some names. We're all big. Well, we're all big people here. Name some names.
There was a column in the New York Times that by a prominent liberal journalist that said we should rename it the Trump virus.
Okay, that is. Does that apply to all people?
So that the president would be blamed. Chuck, this virus began in China.
Why take this? Here's what I ask you. This doesn't help.
This
does not
decisive
help us,
action to protect the American people, and when you see voices on our side pushing back on outrageous and irresponsible rhetoric on the other side, I think that's important.
Do you think this rhetoric from your side helps?
I never begrudge people responding to unwarranted, unjustified attacks. But I promise you, we're going to continue to focus on the mission the president's given this task force and given this government. And that is, we're going to bring the full resources of the federal government to bear. And the American people can be confident that we're going to continue to work this issue. We're going to work with leaders in both parties in Congress to make sure that not only our federal agencies have all the resources they need, but our state and local governments, healthcare providers have the resources and the support to provide the care that every American would want. Remember, Chuck, this is about the lives of the American people.
Completely reasonable from the administration on all this stuff. And yet, somehow the administration are the bad guys here. Look, I really think that we're at a point where if we were invaded by a foreign country, I mean, there would be Democrats who would blame Trump. And I mean actual like divisions. I mean, if we were, if it was like Red Dawn and North Korea started having, paratroopers landing in Montana or whatever, I think there'd be Democrats like, see, look what Trump did to us. Just made those North Koreans invade. There's no reasoning with them. There's no honesty in their analysis. There's no integrity in their assessments. It all is just meant for a purpose here. And the purpose is quite clearly to undermine Donald Trump at every opportunity. Let's just start with, Chuck Todd is like, who, sir? Who's gaslighting? I feel gaslighted here. Chuck Todd. The fact that this guy has one of the more desirable perches in media and for which he's paid millions of dollars. I mean, Chuck Todd is a mediocrity at best in every regard. I don't know what else to say. There's nothing about this guy that's impressive. He never says anything insightful. He isn't an honest and fair-minded person. He's just another lib hack who happened to be, I guess, friends with the right members of the corporate media at the right time. It makes no sense. But Chuck Todd is saying here, who? And I say Chuck Schumer has been saying that the administration has no plan, which is another lie. It's like saying that Trump called this a hoax. That's a lie. Of course, the administration is executing on a plan. And every administration comes into office with the CDC already having things set up. If this happens, then we will do this. If that happens, then we will do that. Every administration. It's not like you show up and Trump has to say, hey, can the CDC figure out if we're going to have a pandemic response? And then the executive branch executes on that plan from the agency where the institutional knowledge and expertise is centered. That's why it's the executive branch. And this is where we are. But let's just really dig into for a second what's going on here. And I will get into my honest thoughts for you about coronavirus and where this is in a moment. But there are Democrats who are rooting for Trump administration failure on this issue with American lives at stake. That's just a fact. And they don't like it being said because it's true. But that is a fact. That is where we are as a country. There are Democrats who tell us that Donald Trump is they say things, quotes, clear and present danger to the United States, that it would be better for us A lot of you said to me, why didn't you point out to Bill Maher on his show that he's been rooting for a recession? I was trying to point out a lot of things. I just had people yapping over me every time I tried to say anything because they're crazy. But yeah, he did very openly on his show, said that he hopes we have a recession. So now this would be the only thing. They know that Trump's policies aren't going to deliver a recession. The only thing that could give them the recession that the Democrats think they need to win back the White House would be pandemic disease. And how many of them think that that's just the price we have to pay for a return to normalcy? To have a president who respects our institutions again. All these slogans, meaningless slogans. And it's very interesting. I've been doing a lot of reading and research on the Russian Revolution, which led to the Soviet Union of 1917. And one thing the Bolsheviks understood and did very well. Remember, the Bolsheviks were just one faction among the various socialists at that period in Russian history. And there was always this internationalist component of what they were trying to do. I mean, Lenin was at the time of the abdication of the Russian Tsar, Nicholas II, Lenin was in exile in Switzerland. Lenin, who was really considered the father of the revolution, and then Stalin took over and led to the Great Terror, and millions of people starved and executed and brutalized and sent to Siberia to freeze to death slowly. That when this was all going on, when the initial struggle for power happened after the Tsar abdicated, in large part because of what was going on with the First World War, where you had massive casualties and government ineptitude, there was people they don't teach this history to people at all anymore. It's just like, the Soviet Union, it just sort of happened. There was this revolution, and then what happened was you had a bunch of hardline thugs who figured out how to seize power. They weren't going village to village all across Russia's, whatever it is, I think it's 8 or 11 time zones, however many time zones Russia has. They weren't running around trying to drum up votes. Seize the power centers. Where are the military garrisons? Where are the telegraph offices? Where are the seats of power? Grab those and then force everybody else to do what you want. One thing they really understood in that whole process was to co-opt the slogans, the imagery of socialism as it had existed among the various socialist factions for, at that point, about 60 years, right? To take the phrases and just make it all about how the rich are bad and just convince those who were often illiterate and uneducated, that all they have to do is mouth these slogans that are platitudes, that don't really mean anything, but that bring out an emotion and then gives a sense of organization with everybody else who is saying the same thing. Whose streets are streets, occupy Wall Street, I mean, you think about the way that the left has organized in recent years, it is a lot of, not my president. They have these things, these placards. They name movements. They then have people that walk around and everyone starts repeating these phrases, and they don't ever think about it. They don't have to think about it. It would be uncomfortable for them to think about it. We now have a Democratic Party that on coronavirus already has decided, we've been talking about this in the context of elections, but there are things that they will just say about this. Doesn't matter what happens. Trump has failed on coronavirus before we know what has even happened with coronavirus in this country. They established the perception of failure, and it doesn't matter what happens after that. And that people don't like to feel like they've been wrong or they're dumb. This is very important. So if you get someone to commit early to an idea, they're going to cling to that idea because they don't want to have to reverse what they've believed or what they've thought. This is why having a conversation with a fundamentalist about anything is very challenging, and some would say very futile, because they would have to, the repudiation of any part of it feels like a repudiation of all of it to them. They've been so certain, and uncertainty is difficult. I'm one of the few hosts who's willing to tell you I don't know everything. I know a hell of a lot more than everybody who was on that Bill Maher panel and all these crazy libs running around, and quite honestly, almost all of the conservative talk show hosts you will listen to. It's not even close. But I'm also willing to tell you what I don't know, and where I do have areas of where I'm still trying to learn, I'm still trying to figure things out. It's so much easier, though. It's such a more effective exercise, especially if you work in the media, to do what the Bolsheviks did. What are the slogans that people like to mouth? What are the things that people like to shout? Get everybody shouting that stuff. Use it for your own purpose. Mobilize them around imagery, phrases. Gustave Le Bon, a French social scientist and theorist, did a whole analysis of this about crowds and how you, and this leads into then mass movements. How do we get to a point of a mass movement? I mean, if you want to read about some of the stuff on your own, Gustave Le Bon is excellent. You can also read True Believer, which is a book about the mindset of people that become mobilized behind a cause and why it's so very, very difficult to change their mind on anything. I mean, with Democrats now, there's no room for any kind of nuance. There's no Eric Hoffer, by the way, is the author of True Believer. If you want to pick that one up, it's a little dense, but it's an interesting read. But we're up against that now on an issue. It's one thing in politics, and this is why I'm thinking about this. It's one thing where, they want universal health care, and we think that that's a bad idea, and so they just want the masses to say, health care should be free, health care should be free. And we don't get to say, well, but it's never free. There's no such thing as free healthcare. Even in the Soviet Union, healthcare wasn't really free. It's just the state was paying people to administer healthcare, paying them poorly, and there weren't the micro decisions necessary for healthy economic exchange that leads to innovation and efficiency and prosperity, the things that we enjoy in this country that the Soviets didn't. It wasn't an accident that things worked out better here than they did in the Soviet Union. It wasn't an accident that while, we were all rolling around in the 70s and the 80s, eating delicious Big Macs and French fries and drinking Coke. And that was, just our standard whenever we felt like it. And they were in bread lines. There are reasons for this. It's not a question of luck. But Democrats reject this. And now, even in the context of dealing with disease, something that affects every human being, all of us, even those of us who think of ourselves as young and healthy, we have relatives who are older, loved ones, friends who are older. We don't want any of them getting sick. I don't want anybody that is dear to me getting coronavirus. And I don't want any American getting coronavirus. And I really mean that. And one part of this that's so disheartening is that for a lot of Democrats out there right now, they're so invested in the president being awful that when you try to get them to admit, hey, you guys agree, right, that Trump really doesn't want this to be bad. He does not want, he's going to do what he thinks he can do, the best job he can do to make sure that there are a bare minimum of spread of this disease and casualties from this disease. They won't co-sign on that. No. I was in the Bill Maher show that said all Trump cares about is the stock market. This is a moronic thing to say. No, Trump actually does care about whether Americans are dying from a disease, but they won't accept that. They won't even make the basic premise. I mean, it does also remind me of how when I was in political science class at Amherst, I was a political science major, which is funny because I actually ended up using my degree, my undergrad degree. Who knew? In the soft humanities, which usually is not the case. Oh, I know we're supposed to have a broad-based liberal arts education, yada yada. But I remember Professor Hadley Arkes, who was my advisor, who was the one conservative in the whole political science department at Amherst. He told this story about how one day he would give this class, and most of the students were liberal, and they never stopped to think maybe there's a reason we're liberal and it's not a good thing. Maybe the reason that there's this disparity on campuses is because young people's minds are intentionally shaped and polluted by left-wing propaganda more effectively by the media and by Hollywood, and that's why there's disparity, particularly among young people being more liberal. But Arkes talked about how people would come into his class all the time and challenge him, and he was never he thought of himself as a great debater. I don't think that's accurate, but he's a very smart guy in his own way. But he would say that one time he had someone who came in, and one of the initial Arkes premises was that and he would say, wow, Mr. Sexton, can we agree that the chair you are sitting in is a chair? And of course, I would say, yes, we can agree that chair. And he goes, oh, so there is such a thing as truth. There is fact and fiction. There is right and wrong. And this was how he would start the discussion about politics and the pursuit of what is good and what is virtuous. And he said that he had a kid come in once. He was like, nope, I will not concede that that is a chair. And he said, wow, I think my work here is done. What is he going to say at that point? That was a bit of my experience in the Bill Maher show. Like, a chair is not a chair. So what are we even talking about here? We're not having a discussion among sentient adults. We're having a temper tantrum. And I think that's where we are with coronavirus right now with Democrats. It doesn't matter what the numbers are. It doesn't matter how they've already decided Trump has mishandled this because he's such a horrible person and because they're so desperate for power. And they won't shift no matter what happens. And that's troubling because that same mentality, as you know, is pervasive across the board with all of their major disputes with this administration. Then they never change their mind.
As soon as this virus started cropping up elsewhere in the world, we should have been on top of it. We should have been putting the money into the research. We should be putting money into making sure that we have vaccines available, that we have tests available, and we need a coordinating person in the White House who is a true leader. And let me just say that the Vice President, Pence, he is the wrong person to be leading this. He is actually the one guy around who has experience in dealing with a virus that gets out of control, only he's the guy who went in exactly the wrong direction. He paid more attention to politics than he did to science, and that really created a health crisis in his state of Indiana. I cannot think of a worse person to put in charge of dealing with this coronavirus now.
Elizabeth Warren is just a total fraud. Yeah, just a total fraud, a phony, a fake. Everything about her is calculated and is for her own benefit. And she stands for really Elizabeth Warren and feel-good liberalism with this veneer of intellectualism that's completely false. It was really bought with fraud, racial fraud. She's not a Native American. And guess what? If she wasn't a Native American professor, she wasn't going to get the professorships that she got. I know, the truth hurts. But this story you keep hearing, this slogan that Pence doesn't believe in science. This is repeated ad nauseum. Pence doesn't believe in science. This is a slight, and it's a slight not just against Mike Pence. This is a continued left-wing, socialist, secular, but so-called Catholic liberals, for example, never pick up on this. What they're really saying is that Christians don't believe in science, and I have a question for the dumb libs about this. Trump doesn't believe in science, they say. Pence doesn't believe in science. It's a meaningless phrase. I mean, does Donald Trump walk around saying, this iPhone runs on magic? What does it mean to not believe in science? Because we don't agree that liberals should be able to leverage a belief that exists from some scientists without an understanding of what the real policy implications would be of implementing something based upon that scientific assertion or theory. I mean, the climate change is the main area I know they always turn to, but there are many others where they say, the science is on our side. This, first of all, comes from a political party that thinks that men and women aren't biologically meaningfully different. The Democratic Party is no longer in a position, and I think we will get to Drag Queen Story Hour later, which I keep thinking, there's no way this exists. And then I see video of it, and it does exist. I keep thinking that they don't actually do this to children, but no, they do this to children. But there's this Democrat line that believing traditional Christians, they mock people, for example. I mean, I actually, I remember not that long ago, I was on it was maybe 7 or 8 months ago now or something. I was on a date, somebody who was a scientist. And when I explained to her that there was uncertainty about some of aspects of Darwin's theory of evolution, she looked at me like I was completely, and she was somewhat conservative. She looked at me like I was absolutely insane. Meanwhile, I said, well, do you realize that some of the most impressive geneticists, some of the most impressive scientists in the field are there's really almost a scientific consensus on the shortcomings in Darwin's theory of evolution based on the fossil record and math and genetics. And there's a book that I've mentioned to you before called Darwin's Doubt by Stephen Meyer that looks specifically at the evidence and makes the case. And by the way, the ultra Darwinists or whatever, the Darwin supporters out there, they just say science. They don't have an argument because when you look at the computations, when you look at the actual math, I mean, they can run algorithms on this now. They can crunch the numbers, so to speak, of the probability of some of the leaps in the fossil record, particularly in what they would call the Precambrian to the Cambrian period, the Cambrian explosion of all these different biological realities that had not existed before, going from simple organisms to organisms that have the complexity, the biological complexity of an eye. And to think that this just happened through trial and error, it's mathematically not possible for it to just happen. So why, and people that talk about Darwin like he had all these answers. Darwin was coming up with his theories before we even knew what the double helix was. Oh, by the way, it was a believing Christian, if memory serves, who found that one out. Darwin came up with this theory of evolution before we knew anything really about microbiology, about epidemiology, about DNA, about RNA. Didn't know any of that. Nothing. But if you try to look at his theory more critically, because really what his theory is meant to be is that for a lot of people is a very simple and straightforward explanation of why there is no God. It's really a refuge of atheists or people who know nothing and don't read anything, but just going to go, I'm smart. I believe in Darwin's theory of evolution. Okay. Yeah, evolution is real. Animals have evolved from other animals and more simple organisms, and that's not actually in doubt. But there are steps along the way that don't make sense. So can we talk about that or no? No, instead they make jokes about how, Mike Pence thinks that, that dinosaurs are fake or something, or thinks that, the earth is 2,000 years old or, whatever, 3,000 years old, whatever it is. These are just smears. These are smears. I mean, the same people that laugh and mock believing Christians for not believing in science. I mean, people in LA, by the way, they don't read books out there. It's amazing. I mean, I know there's smart people in Los Angeles. Obviously, it's a huge metro city, a huge metro area. But the culture in LA is one of from just everyone I talked to, everyone was dealing with out there. There's a culture of deep intellectual laziness, where everyone just sort of repeats each other and nobody really cares. And I'm comparing it to New York. So if you're wondering in New York, people are even if they're crazy libs maybe, but at least they're a little more informed. LA is just like this socialist deluded. The weather is so warm though. That is very nice, I will say. And the food doesn't compare to New York. People say that are crazy. Food in New York City is way better than the food in Los Angeles. There's like 10 good restaurants in Los Angeles. Get out of here. But those who say that there's no good, rather that science and Christianity are incompatible, I mean, I just would want to know, if you look into some things like, let me think, the Big Bang Theory, heliocentrism, if you look into the origins of our understanding of, and the biggest developments in genetics, if you look into, if you were to do a search, for example, of Gregor Mendel, for example, if you were to look at that, you would say, hold on a second. He was a scientist and he was an Augustinian friar. Wait a second. You mean that some of the greatest minds, he's considered the father of genetics. Some of the greatest minds in history when it comes to science were devout Christians. In fact, you probably argue that in the post AD is what we're not allowed to, now it's the common era. No, sorry, it's not the common era. It's in the year of our Lord, Anno Domini. No way. I'm not playing that game. I hate that. Why would we change that? There's a reason why we have the calendar we have. Birth of Jesus. So, my oh my. But this is a story that liberals tell themselves so that they can feel morally superior. This is a story that they tell themselves so that they don't have to actually engage in the facts. And to say that Mike Pence doesn't believe in science, to go to the specifics, of the accusation, it's because there was an outbreak of 70 people with HIV in Indiana, and they were drug users. And if you read up on this, you'll find out that there's a very clear different risk profiles for individuals when it comes to per exposure transmission of HIV. And the worst, the highest level of transmission is if you got a blood transfusion of somebody with HIV, you effectively have the disease. I think it's it's close to 90% if you get a blood transfusion of somebody where there's active HIV. That's the worst. Intravenous drug use is very high per use, but it's not quite as high as a blood transfusion. And then it goes down, and then same-sex male intercourse is considerably higher than heterosexual intercourse. And there's these are all CDC numbers. This is just all the way that the math and the science tells us about this. I think that they don't tell people nearly enough about those different risk factors so they can make decisions for themselves about this. But the problem with Mike Pence in this case was that he didn't want to give people needles because there was a concern that, well, are you encouraging illegal drug use among this population? Shouldn't we be getting them treatment, or shouldn't we? And then their doctors, some people come along and say, no, you want to give them the clean needles. At least they'll keep doing the drugs, but at least you keep them from getting the HIV. But other people come along and say, well, all right, but if it's this population of people that's at risk, shouldn't we try to just also do something to get them to stop putting themselves at risk for? Because giving them clean needles, okay, they've got clean needles for a while, but intravenous drug use is a very high risk factor for HIV. It's one of the it's the most at-risk population per incident in this country. So don't we want to get them away from that so they don't get HIV in a year? Anyway, but see, there's an adult discussion to be had about that. How do you deal with an outbreak of HIV in Indiana with intravenous drug users? What's the best way to approach it? And there are intelligent people on different sides of that would, no, he doesn't believe in science. That's what they say. Doesn't believe in science. This is what I meant about how the socialists will seize phrases and use those phrases to beat down the opposition, to batter down honest discussion, exchange of ideas, and to brainwash people. I mean, this is what propaganda does. They hear this enough, they think it must be true. Christians don't believe in science. Meanwhile, I could sit here and rattle off, just off the top of my head, many of the greatest scientific discoveries in history are from devout, not just people who are like, I go to church once, not Christmas and Easter Christians, like devout Christians, friars, monks, priests. They're responsible for some of the biggest scientific breakthroughs and discoveries in the history of the world. But, if you're a Christian, you don't believe in science. This is what I mean. They don't believe in truth. They don't believe in facts. They don't believe in reality. Much better to feel a certain way about something than have to actually make a case rooted in what is true and what will be true.
We're seeing the beginning of community spread, which, as you mentioned, Allison, is really quite concerning, because when you have community spread, you don't know the real source, the index case of where it's coming from, which makes the idea and the concept and the implementation of contact tracing much more difficult. So, unfortunately, this is something that we expected. Whenever you have a respiratory disease that's easily transmissible, you're going to get community spread, and it's going to become difficult to pinpoint the source of each and every infection. And that's exactly what we're seeing in Washington State and now in several other states throughout the country. It's going to make our job much more challenging.
Now, I think that there's a lane out there for people who are, I hope, I hope there's an option out there for people to take this seriously without panicking about this. I hope that there is the ability. I hope that there is the, well, no, but I know that it's all going to turn into a shout fest. It's all going to turn into a shout fest. I mean, how many people, if you were to ask them, who are so concerned with coronavirus spread in the United States right now and think that it's going to be catastrophic for us and that it's, and that, of course, it's Trump's fault. This disease came from somebody, they think, eating, originally it was bats, and then they said it was a pangolin, I think. I mean, let's be honest, how many people had to Google what a pangolin is? I feel like I'm pretty good when it comes to knowing the animal kingdom, and I was like, wait, I think does it kind of look like an aardvark or an armadillo? A little bit, yeah. But somehow that happens in Wuhan province in China, or rather Wuhan city in China, and it's Trump's fault that now we're dealing with this here. Remember, Trump also shut down the flights from China to the United States. The whole point here is to limit the spread, because the more people that get it, the more people are at risk of dying from it. This is very straightforward, but limiting your exposure to people coming from the epicenter of the disease, that wasn't an idea that right away everybody was on board for. Trump did it, and it was almost certainly the right thing. Almost certainly something that we could, I don't know. I feel like that. Well, we know that they won't give Trump credit for anything that he does well. They won't give him credit in general. Speaking of which, also, I've gotten a little bit of heat because on the Bill Maher show on Friday, I said, look, I don't really like. See, the thing that's great about that show for me, or I shouldn't say it's great about that show, but at least one thing you guys can all see, I'm the same everywhere. I'm the same on air. I'm the same talking to producer Mark. I mean, what I believe is what I believe all the time. And I don't like people going up to somebody and having a friendly conversation and then taping that and then using it to get them fired, unless it's, if this is, Planned Parenthood facility and we're discussing the sale of fetal parts. Yes, that is, if it's one of how many tens of thousands of we all know they're a bunch of lib journos, and some guy off the clock is like, I'm a lib journo, I'm a socialist. Yeah, of course. We already know this. They're all libs, guys. We know this. But then, I mean, to expose this and get somebody fired, I mean, I just think that, look, I have a different, and so some conservative. That was the only thing but you'll notice that's what I say on this show. I'm not going to change what I say because I'm on some other forum with a bunch of left-wing lunatics. I don't like that. I wouldn't like it if somebody from the Huffington Post said to me, hey, Buck, can we just have like a chat? And by the way, pretending to just be a friend or somebody that wants to hang out with me, and they start asking me questions about politics, and they get me dropping a bunch of F-bombs, which I sometimes do in private life, and then all of a sudden they put that tape on the internet. I think that was gross. If I was talking about overthrowing the government or something, well, yeah, I mean, there are obvious judgment calls to be made here. But I disagree with, so people can give me as much heat on that as they want, but it's important to me that you always know that what I say to you here is what I say out there. Not true of there are a lot of people. I mean, there are some radio hosts that I could think of who are conservative, who I remember them calling Donald Trump an idiot on their show. An idiot, that was a quote on their show. And now huge Trump defenders, right? What I say here is what I say out there. What I say to you is what I say in life and what I say in any form, anytime, anywhere. I think James O'Keefe has done some important and some good work on some things. I think that this video with this guy was meaningless, and I don't like this tactic against journalists. If you get Jeff Zucker saying I'm a socialist and we're shutting down Trump, yeah, okay. You get some person who's like, again, people can disagree about this, but I think those who do we want to live in a place where now conservatives are going to be the targets of this, and anything that they say? Remember, this isn't I'm interviewing you. This is, hey, we're having a beer, we're hanging out. I'm going to surreptitiously tape you talking about politics. Is that the world? I don't think that's the world we really want to encourage. I mean, I know that this is something that can happen. In some places, it's actually illegal. It's not illegal. It's not illegal in New York. But yeah, I wanted to use this as an opportunity because people are flooding my inbox now with, how could you not support James O'Keefe? I've had James on my show. I think James has done important stuff. I don't like this tactic used against journalists to show that they're liberals, because we already know they're all liberals. Who cares? I talk about it every day. yes, the journalists think that they're just objective journalists, but they're actually liberal. This is not exposing some important and essential truth. I'm sorry, that's just the reality. But that's why you come here. You come here because I'm keeping it real. Keeping it real, even when I'm getting shouted over and talked over by a bunch of crazy libs. I meant to talk more about just a little bit about where I think this coronavirus thing is going. And I admit that no one actually knows, but so many people are already positioning themselves as if they know to score the points they can politically and otherwise right now. And it is reckless. It is irresponsible. I wish they would not do it, but that is where we are.